Hello and welcome to the first episode of Monstrous Flesh, a podcast that explores the evolution and role of women in the horror genre. I'm one of the hosts of the podcast, Megan Kenny.
And I'm Clelia McElroy, the second host of the podcast.
And would you like to tell us all about the film that we've chosen today, Clelia?
So the film we're discussing today is Ginger Snaps, that came out in 2000. The film centers on the Fitzgerald sisters, Ginger and Brigitte, two death-obsessed, outcasts in their suburban community teenage girls who must deal with the tragic consequences when one of them is bitten by a werewolf. And this film has something for everyone. If you're into gnarly creature design, then this film is for you. If you're interested in exploring teen angst, it's also a good shout. And if you're nostalgic for your early 2000 emo phase, then this is a perfect throwback. Okay, so to get us started, Megan, do you want to tell us a little bit about your own relationship with the film?
For me, the reason why I wanted to do it is because it is one of my absolute favourite films. And I love werewolf films anyway, all werewolf films. But it's really nice to see a werewolf film with a woman as werewolf. And I think this does it so well. Even in, like dialogue's amazing, the clothes are brilliant, the acting's fantastic. I just think it's an absolutely brilliant film. But what about you?
I totally agree. But for me, I actually came quite late to this film. I would have been about 15 when it originally came out, and I'm sure that would have been a favorite for sure. But I think I came across it when I was at uni, in my mid-20s. But it really immediately struck me as something different from anything I'd seen before. As we know, it's such. We both really love it, and that's because it's such a rare film. And it's taboo breaking, and on the most basic level, I think just having a film that talks about having a period, and illustrating this in such a visceral, raw, painful manner as simply immaculate vibes, as far as I'm concerned. And I relate to this so hard.
Yeah. I think I did see it when I was in my teens, actually. If I think about first time I've seen it, because I've seen it so many times because I just love it. But I think I probably were a teenager, and that idea about like outcasts but willing. That's what I like about them so much, is the willing outcasts. They're not like it's not like something like Carrie, for instance, where she really wants to be accepted and she's really craving that peer sort of normalization and acceptance. They're just like, fuck you, I don't like you, why would I like you? And I really love that. And
absolutely, they take so much pride into being outcast, don't they?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting, and I suppose when I was doing some reading, actually, that were one of the things that kept coming up, is this idea that like when Ginger starts a period, there's this sort of a jealousy from Brigitte, but also a sort of an anger towards her, because she's moving into this realm of the average and normality that they promised that they'd never join. And I think that's really interesting, this idea that getting a period makes her like everybody else. Because neither of them had started the period, and either quite late to not have done that was somehow like setting him apart from the peers. And so now Ginger's just average because she's got the curse.
Yeah, average, and at the same time you feel that little pang of jealousy, right, coming from Brigitte, to feel like she's kind of losing her precious sister. And I think in terms of female relationships, I think it talks to us on such such an important level. I think, it kind of encapsulated that, those relationship that we have as young women, the period of your life where, friendship become, incredibly codependent, sometimes in an unhealthy way. In that time you spend so much of your life convincing yourself that no one gets it and no one gets you, that it's almost visceral need to fusion with someone else to become one entity against the rest of the world. And I think, that's kind of how we feel that Brigitte feels when, as soon as Ginger gets her period.
Absolutely, yeah. And that idea about, I think it's really interesting because obviously they've got that friendship and that sort of real solidarity of friendship. But then there's also that sort of sibling, a bit of, I think rivalry might be a bit of a strong word, but that sort of sibling tension. And then, so it's like there's a real complexity to their relationship that I really like as well, that I think again just adds to it overall. It's not this, where you see there's one sibling and they hate their other sibling and it's like older sister, younger sister, and they're sort of pitted against each other. It is, like you said, them against the world. And I just think that's really codependent and probably quite toxic, as we see its film sort of wears on. We're also really, like heartwarming in a way. Really love
really
it.
Heartwarming.
Yeah.
I think definitely relate to that. A lot of people I've actually written about the underlying queerness, I guess, between in their relationship. What do you make of that?
It's interesting. I think that reading of it is very interesting to me. That to point out that. I mean, I think somewhat logic when they're saying that, they don't look alike. And I think, well, yeah, because they're not really sisters. Like, I think that's a sort of a suspended disbelief moment, really, that they don't look that much alike. But, yeah, I think as you move through film, you definitely see that possessiveness of, especially Ginger over Brigitte, I think more so than Brigitte towards Ginger.
Definitely.
There's this, and I don't know whether you can tie that into this idea that as she's sort of going through this transformation, that maybe sort of linked to that. And, there's the bit where they've, by the way, there will be spoilers throughout this podcast. We should have said.
Yes, we should have said that before.
But, when they've killed Tina and there's a moment where she's like sort of looking at her and it's sort of there's like a wanting about it, but then she quickly like covers it with disgust and with being, but then obviously later when, the scene with that like custodian or janitor or whatever you would call him in America, I'm not sure, but and she's like, I don't like the way he looks at you, and there's this real jealousy that seems tinged by like sexual jealousy, and I think
that's
I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think it's something that a lot of people have picked up on. It's like when I rewatch it now, I can totally see that. I think at the time I was, it was more in the realm of that all-consuming friendship that I certainly can relate to that. I think, especially at that age, I just feel like, you and your sister or, with a girlfriend, you kind of feel, everything to each other. So I didn't really define it in those terms, but I can totally see, why that reading is absolutely valid of the film, and I think it brings a really interesting element. And actually, when you were talking about that scene with when they accidentally kill when she accidentally killed one of their schoolmate, and like you said, that moment of of wanting is just so interesting. I think I didn't pick up on it until you did. I mean, you pointed it out, and then I rewatched the film, and I was like, God, yeah, I can totally see that.
Yeah, and I think as well, I've read some really interesting, while prepping for podcasts, I've read some really interesting essays and things that people have done that we will post as well, sort of in the show notes as we for each episode. But saying about that idea that her transformation into a werewolf is a queering of her identity that moves her sort of beyond gender. And this idea that werewolves, because they're always in that like liminal space between sort of human and animal, and the shifting, between these sort of spaces, that when you look at that and read Ginger through that then her transformation does take her out of that binary, that she's not female or male, she's other. And that, when she's sort of encouraging Brigitte to join her in the werewolf, to be a pack together, that's her sort of saying, holding an hand out to Brigitte and saying, you don't have to be in this binary, you don't have to conform, and I think that's such an interesting way to use like werewolf folklore and myth, and to read it in that way I think is really interesting. And I do, I really like that interpretation of it. I think that to see it as, because obviously it's very focused on menstruation, on things that are typically, typically female purely from a biology perspective, but it's not that. I don't think. I never feel like it's limiting them to the biology, and so to read it as that werewolf, that werewolf transformation being about giving them the option to be something more than what society is putting on them as a label, purely because Ginger started a period, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it is such an interesting reading, and something that brings so many layers then to the film and to the film text when you start thinking of it like this. I actually was thinking in terms of, that idea of, linking menstruation to monstrosity that is done in horror, in female-centric horror quite a bit. But I find it really interesting that the beast of, what is it called? The beast of Bailey Downs comes for her because he can smell her period that's just come on. And, in a way that idea that's kind of an unspoken consensus in our culture, that the minute we start menstruating, we are fully formed women in the biological sense, and that disgusting rhyme, old enough to bleed, old enough to breed, when in actual fact what it denotes is the moment that we actually become aware of the male gaze and sexual predatory behavior. So that might be, stay with me with that, but in a sense I think the monster's attack on Ginger could be read as a sexual assault. And it's her response to it both physically and then emotionally that sets this film apart from a straightforward victim turned monster sort of film. I think both the sisters have this nihilistic, destructive side to them. And what this film does is really acknowledge that young women have every right to be angry and to have desires and to lash back at the world. It counters kind of the false image of smooth sailing adolescence that perhaps pop culture was kind of perpetrating at that time. So in that sense, I think it's it's a very, very different monster film from anything that was out there at the time. And I don't think that's I think it's something that's been assimilated since in other films like Jennifer's Body, for example. Definitely you can see the influence of it in it, but it's so unique in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that reading of it, as you said, like as a metaphor for a sexual assault, and not even, I suppose, because it's by the faceless, the beast of Bailey Downs, we never find out who that werewolf is when they're not a werewolf. It feels very much then like society's assault on her. It's bigger than just one person. It's like
exactly.
Yeah, and like you say, it's society's putting on her of old enough to bleed, old enough to breed, which is disgusting, isn't it? It's vile, but
it is horrible, isn't it? I know.
But yeah, and I think when you look at how I can't remember his name, the guy who was in it. This is really well informed podcasting, isn't it? I can't remember what his name is.
No, I don't either, honestly.
That guy, anyway. When you watch it, there's only one really. Yeah.
He'll be in the show notes.
Yeah. But after he's hit the werewolf, and then he sort of, when he's talking to Brigitte about it, and he says, well, that'd explain the human circumcised dick and why you were running for your life from it. And I think that, again, brings it back to this idea about a forced sexuality and a forced sort of sexual awakening, if you like, on Ginger. And Brigitte, because Brigitte's there. So I think even how that scene's shot is so brilliantly done. You know, how Brigitte's just left and she can see her being dragged away and then it's all silent. And she's alone, like, in that. I mean, I'm just thinking about it because I know we've talked about this before, but I do very much see this as Brigitte as protagonist, even though it's called Ginger Snaps, and I don't know what you think about that.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it is. It's definitely, Brigitte is definitely the protagonist and the final girl, I would say, for me, in the film, and it's even more obvious. I mean, I know we're gonna. People don't necessarily agree with the sequel. They think it shouldn't be talked in the same space. But I love it. I absolutely love the sequel, and I think that's that her being the clear hero of that trilogy is even more apparent in the second one. But
yeah, absolutely. And I think if people haven't seen the second one, I would definitely recommend watching it because I love it like you as well. Mm-hmm. And I think as a trilogy, it's amazing. And I think one of the things I find really interesting when we were talking a little bit about that idea about sort of sexuality and things is the contrast between the presentation of lycanthropy between Ginger Snaps and Ginger Snaps 2. Because Ginger's a very sexy werewolf. She gets that really lovely sort of streak in her hair and she's like, she becomes very confident, very, that sort of attitude.
She has her moment of walking in the corridor.
The slow-mo.
All eyes on her. Love it.
Slow-mo down the corridor. But in the second one, in Ginger Snaps Unleashed, which is very much Brigitte's story, her transformation is absolutely abject and grotesque. Like, she's literally of falling to pieces before your eyes, But I wonder if part of that is because she's continuing to fight against it she's continuing to fight her own evolution, if you like. Whereas Ginger very much leans into it, definitely, and accepts it and accepts herself and who she is. She's not trying to find a cure. Brigitte's desperate Ginger is very much leaning into her monstrosity and very much enjoying it, and although I suppose we'll talk about ending in a bit, but although I think ending is quite punishing about that, I do think that when through main body at film, it's quite refreshing to see someone enjoying the monstrosity. And I think particularly for werewolf films, very often it is tied up to that shame and that stigma and people desperately trying to find a way not to be a werewolf anymore, which I suppose is understandable to a point. But if you think about it as a metaphor for that, monstrous feminine and for like the animal within, it's really nice to see her just going, well, I'm a werewolf. I mean, I know the tail bothers her when she's like duct taping it to her leg, but
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think it is so refreshing to see that take on the story, and I think the way that Ginger's transformation is dealt in that film versus the way that Brigitte's transformation is dealt in the second film, which is way more about addiction. That's it. I mean. Brigitte really deals with it as if it's as if it's sorry, I'm losing my words completely. But as you said, Ginger really leans into the the desire that she has for it. It's like it's dangerous, but it's also very appealing. And I like the way that it really it really shows that. I'm completely losing what I'm trying to say, but I think it's just dealt with in such a different way, but two very interesting ways.
I totally get what you mean, and I think it is that idea about this linking a sort of sexuality, particularly like female sexuality and animalism. And, you know, that brilliant quote when she's like, I got this ache and I thought it was for sex, but really I just want to tear everything to fucking pieces. And like the tie-in to misogyny and patriarchy and this idea that you can only be, you know, it's fine for all lads at school to be shagging about. That's fine. She can't do that because, you know, a girl can only be a slut or a virgin. We live in these binaries. and she's very aware of that. And I think that as the film is very aware of it and makes to make an explicit link between that idea about, you know, punishment of sexuality is again a really nice change. I mean, I did see some criticism of it actually that I did want to ask you about. Which is that some people have been critical of this and Jennifer's Body by saying that because it presents these characters as purely driven by their own sexuality and sexual sort of desires, and because that's, you know, heteronormative, and, you know, that it's very much about these... Well, I suppose how it were painted, well, these films are just about these girls having sex and demonising it, that they're anti-feminist, that like Ginger Snaps is anti-feminist, and I just wondered what your thought was about that.
That seems like a very no, that sounds like bullshit to me, to be completely honest. I don't think that it is being that, you know, those characters are being demonized for leaning into their desires. I think it's no, I think there's something really freeing about it. I mean, it's really interesting because I think, you know, typically men and women have such different reactions to those films. But, you know, as you know already, but, you know, I just think that whenever you ask, you know, women about Ginger Snaps, then they just see it as such an amazing expression of female desire, freedom, being able to completely enact, you know, that female rage as well. I think Jennifer's Body, you know, fits into the same realm as well. The problem is with Monstrous movie is that the monster has to die at the end. In fact, that was, you know, a question I was gonna ask next is, you know, does Ginger have to die? You know, is there a place for the monster in society? You know, in terms of a narrative point of view, it's like it's kind of difficult to see how, you know, there could be another resolution almost, you know, to a monster movie. But yeah, the message it sends at the end is really quite disheartening, but a little bit like Jennifer's Body. It's like the curse is then transferred to the curse, you know, is really, you know, transferred then to, you know, to the next person along, you know. So what do you make of it?
No, I mean, I don't think it's anti-feminist at all, because, you know, it was written by a woman, and that's, you know, that I think when you watch it, it's very clearly that it's got that empathy for their perspectives, and like you say, I were gonna say exactly the same point, which is that in all monster movies, the monster dies at the end. That's the way that, you know, I say all as a sweeping generalization, but particularly for like werewolf films, you know, it's the way that the film, the sort of narrative goes, this idea that they're a monster that is so unable to be contained. I mean, I'm thinking about, you know, An American Werewolf in London, which is another amazing film, but that's, again, spoiler if you've never seen it. Spoilers. But that is, you know, that is the way of the werewolf myth. And so I don't think that by continuing that it makes it an anti-feminist film, because, like you've said, what would the outcome be when Ginger has that final transformation and she is just this enormous wolf? You know, we never see whether the beast of Bailey Downs turns back. We don't know that. And I think that's what this does that's really interesting as well, is normally, you know, you'll see in a lot of films that people change and then they change back, and obviously it's tied to a full moon, which is what ties this in so well with menstruation and things. But Ginger's transformation is so gradual, and there don't seem to be any going back, and so like the outcome seems to be just total permanent change. So could she survive? Yes,
that's right, exactly.
You know,
yeah.
Would the dogs?
Is there a place for the werewolf?
Yeah, would the dogs of Bailey Downs be safe? No. So
Exactly.
yeah,
The
but
werewolf that must die so the dogs can thrive.
but I do think that it's, and I do think it is a very sad ending, but it's very poetic and it's very in keeping, with their dynamic, that rather than, Brigitte leaving and trying to find this cure, she stays with Ginger and she is with her as long as she can be. And I think that again just reinforces that relationship, and again says something about how friendships and sisters and relationships can be tested, but when they're built on a really solid foundation, that sort of friction or it disappears, doesn't it, when the chips are down, sort of thing. And it is a really beautiful ending.
It is a beautiful ending, and it's a beautiful way, of when Ginger dies at the end. It's not in that typical monster movie fashion where it's a really dramatic, super bloody, killing, shotgun to the face for the werewolf. I think it's just such a beautiful way for the sisters to to say goodbye. I was just going to make one last point about something that you touched up on a little earlier about the I was going to say the gender neutral nature of a werewolf, which I find a really interesting. It's a really interesting thing, and I think I only started really thinking about that quite recently, because to me, I think werewolf, apart from this film and a few other occasions, feels very gendered. Actually, it feels like it's been really appropriated by male narratives. Especially with the thing of the transformation, to transform and transform back. I think that's really been appropriated by, that's really been codified as male. I was wondering if you had some thoughts on that, or if it's changed, do you think?
I think it has a little bit. I think when you think back to sort of classic werewolf films, you're thinking about, like An American Werewolf in London or something, and like you said, typically you see men transformed. And I think so as a folklorist, and a lot of my research focuses on folklore and belief and things, when you see that there's an interesting connection between sort of werewolf lycanthropy and witchcraft and the witch trials. And this is a very broad statement that, please don't email and tell me how wrong I am. But, this idea that women were witches and men were werewolves. And that's not to say that there were no women who were accused of lycanthropy. But there does seem to be, at that sort of time period and historically, that men are accused of becoming ravenous beasts and women are accused of witchcraft. And really that comes down, there's all the social and political and everything, all these other factors tied up in it. But yeah, I do think that I'm sure there's very few presentations in film I can think of women as werewolves, which is a big shame. And that's why I think Ginger Snaps, all three films, but particularly this, Ginger Snaps, the first one, because it is so heavily tied into this sort of change in Ginger's life and to her sort of social change as well as bodily change, that it's such an interesting application of that sort of folklore in a new way. I'd love to see more films with women as werewolves. I think it'd be brilliant.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we need way more of that. I was asking because I was reading when I was doing my research, I came across a really interesting article by Aviva Briefel, about the nature of the masochist nature of monsters. And in it, she was talking about Ginger Snaps and saying that Ginger Snaps explores a different monstrosity, one based on female masochism, which is very unusual because when the female monster inflicts pain on herself, then she does so either by coercion from an outside outside force, like as we can see in the Exorcist, for example, or as a way of terminating her monstrosity, like Carrie, like Ripley in Alien 3, like Sarah in The Hunger. And those female characters demonstrate a form of masochism that is intended to eliminate rather than unleash their monstrosity. But Ginger Snap definitely does something completely different. So yet another way in which this film is so groundbreaking.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? When you think about werewolf films, you know, generally, and the ones that are held up as like, you know, the canon of the genre, they're very much tied to that idea about, you know, werewolves are tied to sexuality, aren't they? And they're tied to that idea about the beast within and letting that beast run free. And then dealing with consequences after. So, you know, again, I mean, I keep coming back to An American Werewolf in London, but I just think it's such a brilliant example of the werewolf. And again, one of my favourites, but, you know, him running around zoo naked and stealing a woman's coat, you know, and having to, like, get home on bus in a woman's coat, and things like that. And, like, the idea that the acts as that sort of cautionary tale that if you give in, then you will have to face the consequence and the punishment for that. And although I think Ginger is punished, you know, she's punished in the way that all monsters are punished. But I think there's a lack of judgment about her behaviour. Absolutely. And I don't think she's ever portrayed. So again, when I said about people being critical of the film, it's this idea that you can either read it as a very transgressive look at sexuality, or you interpret it as them as sexually aberrant, that this is their sexual aberration, and that then makes them a source of disgust, and you know, that they are you know, to be reviled. And I don't think that my interpretation of it would be that transgressive. You know, that it's
absolutely 100%. Yeah, I agree there.
And even when she's, you know, getting it on with that loser in car, and he's like, "Oh, it's Guy here," you know, she's so empowered. It empowers her. And again, I think it's something about, and I know this is something that we talk about a lot, and I'm sure it's going to come up a lot when we talk about other films. But that idea that to lean into being socially unacceptable is the ultimate in empowerment, that to refuse to conform and to enjoy not conforming is empowerment, and it is saying, you know, that you've got that right to exist as you want to exist. And I feel like Ginger does that, and I don't think that it's necessarily that she's demonized in the film for that. You know, and yeah, I mean, obviously we love it, so maybe we're a bit biased, and I would be interested to know what other people think.
We are, no.
I would be interested.
No, but I think,
yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's you know, that's made very clear in the film by the fact that she's also. Well, she does. For starters, she doesn't kill any other women. Apart, you know, I mean, the only other woman that dies is, you know, is as a result of an accident.
When she saw her had it coming, you know, she weren't very nice. So
exactly, yeah, bullied, you die. But also that she's very, you know, almost choosy to who she kills, and so it's But that you never get the sense also that it's something that she particularly. You know, it's not necessarily what she's seeking as well, I think, in the film. So so that's, you know, you said earlier that she's never, you know, yes, she dies at the end. She has to die because, as we said, you know, what the monster doesn't have anywhere to go. You know, as the film, you know, the narrative goes, but also, you know, in terms of, you know, society, but, you know, there is that sense that there is no judgment, that, you know, we do feel a lot of pain, actually, for her and for her fate, rather than thinking, well, she's the monster, she has to die, and that's how it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, when she talks about becoming and changing, and, you know, when she says to Brigitte about, oh, it's like, you know, it's like touching yourself, you know, everywhere, you know, it's and then it's all supernovas and it's amazing. And I think that is, again, like that idea, it's all right, again, if we see it as this metaphor for like sexuality, we see that's encouraged in men, you know, that awareness and that that entitlement to desire and to sexuality is really given. And even in monster films with men, you know, we see, it's as though it's expected that, you know, men are going to turn into beasts sort of thing. That's a very, you know, and I think that's where that sort of gender coding of werewolf as male comes in. But to present it and to tie it so explicitly like that to sexuality, I think is really interesting. You know, rather than it being sort of hinted at that maybe this is tied up, she explicitly says
it's very clear.
Yeah, and it's I mean, I think again, like you said, in many ways it's groundbreaking, and I think it really is for a lot of reasons. I think what I would like us to have a chat about, because I'm also a body horror obsessive, I think that would be fair to say.
Obsessed.
So what do you think about the body horror elements of it?
I mean, as you know, I'm not a massive body horror fan, but I think it does something really different in that film. I think it was body horror I was ready to withstand, because it's body horror that I think as women you can totally relate to. I think there's just, you know, that the whole thing about transformation, the body transformation, you know, everything that she goes through is just it's so visceral, and yes, it's completely completely to the extreme, but actually I don't know, I just kind of felt like yes girl, same. So yeah, no, I was 100% there for it, and the same in the sequel as well. It's just, which is, a lot more graphic in a way, but yeah.
I mean, I think particularly in sequel they really lean into that in a way that is very satisfying, I think, because it's gross. Obviously body horror is gross, that's that's the nature of it, but it's very, like, it's very interesting. And that when, you know, she finds out she's got a tail, and there's like this comedy element to it when they're sort of taping it to her leg so she can do gym, and you know, and then she's like shaving her chest and she's like, I can't have an hairy chest, like this is too much, you know, and that slow, I think the fact that it's such a slow transformation over a period of time is as satisfying as when you get, you know, the big, which is one of my favourite things in werewolf films, the transformation. You know, I love that. And I watched recently the Company of Wolves, which I love. And that does that so well. And again, tying that idea about sexuality up to this idea
best
about
werewolf transformation.
Yeah, but that's a very visceral in a very immediate way, whereas I think in this, Ginger's transformation over that sort of month is very gradual, but you get to see it in much more detail, I suppose, because it's not over way in a few minutes. It's, you know, and you see how she's slowly changing, and again that idea about, you know, existing in this liminal space, and something else that I read was saying about how sort of adolescent women exist in that liminal space anyway. This idea that when, you know, you're sort of hovering at the edge of the supernatural, and it ties into that idea that, you know, in many cultures and at many different time points, women have been seen as, you know, polluted during menstruation and much more vulnerable to possession, and they've been sort of isolated from the communities and things. And so, like, this idea that the menstruating woman is an object to both disgust and desire, and particularly for adolescent women who are just starting menstruation, because they're at that sort of point between childhood and adulthood, and then this idea about that space between disgust and desire, I think, is a really interesting one. That I think
it is.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, I was just going to send that to, and I really like how he plays as well on the, you know, on the lack of knowledge as well. You know, from that perspective, from adolescent girls, of like what is, you know, when your body is changing, you know, to those extremes, and in a way, you know, I think it's portrayed really quite well in the film. The, you know, like, you know, she knows she's going through a transformation that is not, you know, that is beyond, you know, what you should be expecting, but as there is also that element of denial and, you know, and of you know, not quite knowing where, you know, where's the benchmark actually for body transformation, what is puberty and what is monstrosity, you know. So I think that you know, does that really well.
And I think that comes as well back to this idea at a wider level about what it says about society and about that nuclear family, about the fact that the teenagers, and they're still so unaware of their own body, because obviously the parents have not, you know, it reminds me in a way a lot of Teeth, which I'm sure we'll cover at some point, because both love that. But that idea that her body is, you know, it's like a foreign landscape to her. She's got no idea. And so, like, for Ginger at first and Brigitte, when they're dealing with it on their own, because they don't want to tell the parents, because the mum's, like, trying to get at them all the time, you know, she's trying to be involved. But then it's when, and, you know, they're trying to deal with it, and, like, when she says, "Oh, are you sure it's just cramps?" She's like, "Don't use just and cramps in the same sentence." But, you know, she don't know what to buy. And when they're looking at that wall, just that wall of, like, tampons and the pads, and they're like, "What are we dealing with here?" And, you know, but then again, that sort of, not even just from their point, but from everyone around them's point, this idea that the bodies are so this mysterious thing, like nurse saying, "Oh yeah, bleeding's normal." She's like hemorrhaging. She's not bleeding. You know, she's seriously bleeding. "Oh no, that's normal. That's normal." You know, it is that sort of discussion about bodies and that really tumultuous time, like adolescence, where it's like you said, should there be air there? Should there not be air there? Is this normal? You know, does everyone have this? And it's really, again, I think, pitching it at that age as well, when it is so emotionally, like, you know, so emotionally tumultuous, and everything's changing, and, you know, you're at that really weird stage where you're not an adult but you're not a child, and to put this extra level of transformation at that point, I think, is another thing that I really, really like about it.
Yeah, I think that's it. This is exactly it, and I think this is why this film endures, is because it really crystallizes this, you know, this universal experience of, you know, of being a girl at that age, and that, you know, it's you know, no matter, you know, what period of time it takes place in, it's 100%. You know, no matter where you put it in the world, no matter what time, this is such a universal experience. So,
yeah, no, it is. But I mean, what is it? Do you think? I know we've talked about, you know, other films, and obviously I've made my obsession with the werewolf plain, but what is it about werewolf films, you think, that we just love so much, that we keep returning to?
I think for starter, I think we love a female-centric werewolf film, because there just aren't goddamn enough of them, and we want to see more. So filmmakers out there, go on.
Yes. More.
And exactly. You know, and as you mentioned previously, I think, you know, this idea that, you know, werewolves neither male nor female, and yet there's you know, a definite gendering shortcut that's been made in popular consciousness of werewolves men, which, you know, as we know, makes zero sense, because of course, you know, the changeability of, you know, of the werewolves and of women, you know, those two things are kind of like a marriage made in heaven. So we need to see more of those stories. But yeah, I think for me, you know, I love werewolf because of the transformation, you know, nature of the narrative. It really is something that resonates with me. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, everything you've just said, absolutely. I think I love to see women becoming like monstrous, you know, which is obviously monstrous flesh. That's why we're here. But I love that. I love that, and I think it's such an enduring belief as well. The idea of the werewolf, you know, across time points and across cultures, and I mean, it is a very painful history. Obviously, you know, people were arrested and they were executed for being werewolves, and there is all that there. But as you've said, it endures. There's something about this idea that people can change into, you know, this beast and then change back again, and this idea about, you know, transformation that just captures us as people. I always think it's something that is, you know, like a bit like Ghost. I'm going into my paranormal area now, which is not really relevant to this, but you know,
go. I want to hear this.
But you know, like ghosts endure. The idea of ghosts and things like that capture that, to me, I always think speak to something intrinsic about the human condition because we keep returning to them. And I think werewolves and a part of that, and other cryptids and other things like that. But I think for me, I'll always watch a werewolf film. If it's on offer, I'm going to watch it. I love it. I've seen some stinkers. I've seen some fantastic ones.
I was going to say, I can't wait to get a list from you.
But yeah, I think it is just that idea of change and that link between human and animal, and the idea of like it being uncontrollable, but still, I suppose, finding some enjoyment in it. But I also like from the sort of other side of that, even though, you know, if I had to walk through like a wood at night and there were a full moon, I would not be going, sort of thing. Like, I've learnt my lesson from all these films.
You know best.
But even that, like, you know, it gives you a fear, doesn't it? This idea that there's some enormous beast roaming around that could be, you know, could be coming at you at any point. Like, it's exciting in a way that other things just aren't, I think. You know, like a slasher. I love slashers, and we're going to talk about them as well. This is not me denigrating a slasher.
I was going to say, don't diss the slashers,
you know, but like that's a man, you know, with a knife.
That's a very real, really real threat.
Whereas a werewolf stalking you, it feels different. And I suppose it goes back to a love of fairy tales as a child, and like Red Riding Hood, and obviously we can go back and back and back to Red Riding Hood for werewolf. You know, werewolf films. But yeah, I think it is just that. Just love a wolf. Everybody does. Angela Carter said it best. But
fantastic.
Yes. So recommendations then. What are
recommendation? Well, actually, throughout this whole conversation, actually, I kept thinking about how Cat People was the the ginger snaps of its day, but you know, like where it failed, then ginger snaps really went there. But I think, you know, I think it's definitely a film that people should go back and watch, because it's kind of been an origin story for that idea of as repressed sexuality and monstrosity. So yeah, that would be a recommendation.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about Ginger Snaps 2, obviously a lot, and 3, so I would say watch them all. American Werewolf.
Yes.
We've talked about. I did review one recently that came out called Wolf Manor, which is excellent, and that's very much like a sort of single location, the werewolves inside the house sort of thing, and that's really good. And practical effects. That should be other thing I should have said to jump back to why I love them so much. I love practical effects, and I will go on and on about this through this podcast. And I think when you see in werewolf films that practical effects work that transforms someone into a wolf, I just think it's fantastic. So that's another reason why I love them. And Wolf Manor has excellent practical effects, as does an American Werewolf. Obviously, the founding father, if you like, of the practical effects. One that people might not have seen, although if people have seen it, I would really love for people to tell me that they've seen it and to discuss it with them, is Wolf Cop.
Oh my god, of course. We need to have a special episode, actually.
We need a special episode. Now you're mentioning on Wolf Cop.
Actually, now that you're mentioning all this wolf film, I have to say, at first I was like, I don't think I can, mention more than 2 werewolf films.
No, let's get them all.
Now it's going back to me. It's coming back to me, definitely.
Wolf Cop is, to the best of my knowledge, the only film to show the genital transformation. And I think that's important and people need to see it. So, Wolf Cop.
That's brave. They went there.
Wolf Cop.
Fantastic. We'll have a bonus episode for that one.
Yes, definitely bonus episode on Wolf Cop. The Company of Wolves, I would say, is an excellent one.
Obviously. Yeah, obviously. And I mean, not a werewolf film, but I would say Teeth. You mentioned it earlier. Yeah. And I think in that same vein of of female monsters, I will definitely recommend this one as well.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I'm not thinking of any more off the top of my head, although I'm sure that many more will come back to me. But people could let us know. People can let us know on social media.
Let us know.
Yeah, or drop us an email. Tell us about your favourite werewolf films. So thanks for listening to Monstrous Flesh, and please join us next time when we'll be talking about Teeth, the 2007 comedy horror with a bite. So feel free to watch that before you listen to the next episode. And you can find out more about us via our website, which is monstrousflesh.co.uk. And you can also find all our sources in the show notes, and we'll be sharing those on the website and on social media as well. So you can find us on Instagram at Monstrous Flesh. And we'd love to hear from you, so please feel free to contact us on social media or via our website with your film recommendations or your thoughts on the films that we've discussed. And also, please rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts and help us to spread our spooky word by telling your friends about Monstrous Flesh. But until next time, creep it weird, everyone!